Hi, my name is Odalis Mills, and today I'll be talking about Daniel Hale Williams. So, are you guys familiar with the AMA, also known as the American Medical Association? Well, did you know that when it first began, the criteria to be in it was that you had to be an all-white person, and there was no place for African Americans to be represented. So, Daniel created the NMA, which I'll later talk about later in the speech. Daniel Hale Williams was born on the 18th of January in 1856, and he had various occupations before he actually pursued the medical field. He was once a shoemaker, and then after his parents died, he ended up moving to Chicago, where he was working for Dr. Henry Palmer, a surgeon at the Chicago Medical College. This is it. And he was motivated to pursue his education in medicine while also advocating for the African American community with his advancements from encyclopedia.com. Daniel Hale Williams had an immeasurable impact on the medical community by contributing his knowledge to bring awareness to the underlying problem of racial equality. And today I will talk to you about what he's achieved, how he achieved his desire to encourage medical advances in the heart surgery, the presence of African American doctors in the medical field, and the beginning of the NMA. So in 1893, when he was just 37 years old, he shocked the medical community when he successfully pioneered the first open heart surgery. He performed surgery on a man named James Cornish who had a stab wound. And without receiving any blood transfusions, taking him in to get an x-ray, nor antibiotics just to fight the wound, just because since it was with a knife, there could be infection. And despite his reputation, he still proceeded straight into surgery to save this man's life. And he already wasn't wanted there just because he was an African American man. And despite his reputation, he still went to save the man. And with 6 physicians witnessing the operation, he opened the patient's chest cavity with the knife used in the stabbing, and he had seen that it penetrated the heart about 1/10 of an inch. 51 days later, Cornish was released from the hospital, completely recovered, and he even lived for another 50 years, outliving his surgeon by 12. After his reputation was skyrocketed from this, he was recognized as chief surgeon at the Freedmen's Hospital from blackpast.org. He became an influence to everyone around him because people from various geographical backgrounds were coming just to go see him do surgeries just because they wanted to see his work. He reorganized Freedmen's Hospital by developing ambulance services, improving surgical procedures, and providing staff opportunities for numerous African American physicians. That's just a little background of how Daniel changed the face of medicine after he pioneered the first open heart surgery. He created the first interracial hospital and it was to create a workplace that advocated for African American medical professionals. This was the same year he actually pioneered the first open heart surgery. He wanted to change the discrimination in medicine by providing this hospital, which was named the Providence Hospital and Training School for Nurses. This was the nation's first hospital with a nursing and intern program that had racially integrated staff from biography.com. This was a big step because African Americans were not even allowed in hospitals, even less allowed to work there. So he wanted to create a place where they could know that they could pursue a career where they actually had somewhere to work. With his achievements, he encouraged young African Americans to pursue the medical field. He even helped a young woman named Emma Reynolds get accepted to an all-white nursing school in Chicago. While working at this hospital, he also even met this famous writer, Frederick Douglass, as we all know who he is, from biography.com. Frederick set an example to Daniel that he could accomplish racial equality for African Americans in the medical field, as Frederick was doing in his writings, that each person had their own way of pursuing racial equality. Furthermore, with Daniel's growing reputation, he was beginning to have a cultural impact for his people in the community. He even raised the value of racial equality in the workplace by co-founding the NMA, the National Medical Association, in 1895 from nmanit.org. He wanted to create a safe place where minorities feel like they could belong, since the AMA did not represent this. They wanted to feel they had somewhere to show their where their voice could be heard, where they could be represented by other people who looked like them. The American Medical Association had the criteria where you had to be an all-white person to be accepted, and that wasn't fair. And the NMA is the nation's oldest and largest organization representing African American physicians and health professionals in the U.S. The AMA had been growing ever since it started. This association had not only decreased disparities within the medical field for African Americans and other minorities, but encouraged hospitals and medical schools to accept people of all color. And ever since this association, the number of Black students enrolled in medical school increased from 15.8% in 1947 to 31% in 1955. By the 1960s, over half of all medical schools, 14 out of 26, were accepting African American students from nmenet.org. As I wrap up, I hope that you remember that he was a catalyst for surgeries in the modern age of medicine by performing the first open heart surgery. He created the interracial workplace in a hospital, hoping others would follow. He created the NMA, the National Medical Association, to give African Americans a place to feel accepted. So how can we measure the success of a man that dedicated his life to the health and well-being of his patients while creating an environment in the medical community that gave minorities and African Americans a place to be heard and accepted? So thank you for listening today, and this is a picture of him.